The next category is indoor environmental quality. There are 2 mandatory requirements and 8 credits in this category. Projects can earn up to 12 points in this category. Let us first try to understand what indoor environmental quality means. Indoor environmental quality refers to the quality of the building's internal environment in relation to the health and well-being of the occupants. The parameters associated with indoor environment are air quality, visual comfort, thermal comfort, and acoustics. Air quality and acoustics are self-explanatory. Visual comfort is associated with the quality of lighting and how much the occupants are connected with the outdoor through daylight and views to the outdoor. Thermal comfort is associated with comfortable temperature and humidity in the space. The mandatory requirements and credits in indoor environmental quality are mainly associated with indoor air quality and visual comfort. Thermal comfort and acoustics are not deeply addressed in IGBC rating system. We can classify the mandatory requirements and credits in indoor air quality into 3 groups. Group 1 is associated with indoor air quality. Group 2 is associated with visual comfort. And Group 3 is associated with occupant well-being. This is what indoor environmental quality means. Now, we will discuss the importance of indoor environmental quality. For the question, which is more polluted, indoor or outdoor? Most people answer outdoor is more polluted when compared to indoor because there are a lot of emissions from vehicle, industries, etc. And this is not true. Even though there are a lot of emissions in outdoor, they get diluted in the atmosphere. But indoor is a closed space. Indoor is 2 to 5 times more polluted compared to outdoor. Secondly, people spend more than 90% of their time indoor. Hence, it is important to address indoor environmental quality. And finally, improvement in indoor environment is directly associated with the well-being of the occupants. It improves productivity and reduces absenteeism. Let us start with the first group of mandatory requirements and credits associated with indoor air quality. The first strategy is source reduction, that is, reduce the contaminants getting into the building. The second strategy is ventilation, that is, provide sufficient pressure by effective ventilation to dilute the contaminants in the space. The third strategy is to measure and monitor to ensure the indoor air quality is within acceptable limit. One mandatory requirement and 3 credits under source reduction strategy. Credit 4. Minimize indoor and outdoor pollutant is about reducing pollutants from pedestrians, HVAC equipment and any potential contaminated areas like janitor rooms, printer rooms, etc. Credit 5. Low emitting materials is about reducing the contaminants from finishing materials such as paints, coatings, adhesives, composite wood, carpet, etc. And credit 8. Indoor air quality management during construction is about reducing the contaminants at construction stage. We will discuss these mandatory requirements and credit one by one. Mandatory requirement 2. Tobacco smoke control. The intent or objective of this mandatory requirement is to minimize the exposure of non-smokers to the adverse health impacts associated with passive smoking. Here are some of the facts and figures associated with second-hand smoke. There are 2 requirements to comply with this mandatory requirement. Number 1. Having a no smoking policy in the building. that is, prohibits smoking except in designated smoking rooms. Designated smoking rooms in the building have some special requirements. We will discuss them in the next slide. The second requirement is any exterior smoking area should be at least 7.6 meter away from outdoor or fresh air intake points. The reason is that outdoor air is taken for ventilation. In order to dilute the contaminants, it should not contain tobacco smoke. There are 4 requirements for designated smoking rooms. Number 1. Smoking rooms should be completely sealed to ensure that the tobacco smoke does not enter other spaces and contaminate them. Number 2. There should not be any air recirculation into the smoking room. Generally, air-conditioned spaces will recirculate air. This is not allowed in the smoking room. The air from the smoking room should be completely exhausted out. It should not be recirculated. The third requirement is the exhaust should be at least 7.6 meters away from any air intake points, so that it will not enter the building and contaminate the space. And finally, smoking room should be maintained at negative pressure. Negative pressure of at least 5 Pascal, that is minus 5 Pascal compared to adjacent spaces. The negative pressure will ensure that when the doors are open, air from the adjacent spaces will come into the smoking room and the contaminated air in the smoking room will not go into the adjacent spaces. The next credit associated with source reduction is credit for minimize indoor and outdoor pollutants. The intent or objective of the credit is to minimize the building occupants' exposure to hazardous indoor and outdoor pollutants, which adversely affect indoor air quality and occupant well-being or occupant health. This credit addressed 3 sources of pollutants. Number 1. Potential contaminants from pedestrians. Number 2. Potential contaminants through fresh air handling units or air handling units. And number 3. Cross contaminations from contaminated spaces like janitor rooms, printer rooms, etc. Contaminations from pedestrians can be addressed by providing entryway system of at least 2 meters length in all regular building entrances. Then entryway system will prevent dust entering into the building through pedestrians. Cross contamination from potentially contaminated rooms like copier rooms, printer rooms can be addressed by treating them similar to designated smoking rooms, which includes maintaining a negative pressure in the contaminated areas. Having a deck-to-deck partition, that is slab-to-slab partition instead of partition only up to the false ceiling. Self-closing doors and not recirculate the air in the air conditioning system that should be exhausted directly outside. Contaminants from FAHUs or AHUs can be addressed by first strategy, providing MVRV 13 or EU 5 or better rated filters in FAHUs or AHUs. We will discuss about MVRV and EU in the next slide. The second strategy is to install UV lamps in FAHUs or AHUs, which will disinfect by killing bacteria and germs. MVRV is an abbreviation of Minimum Efficiency Reporting Value. MVRV is a rating developed by ASHRAE. To be more particular, ASHRAE standard 52.2 to report filters' ability to capture particles of size between 0.2 to 10 microns. Higher the MVRV rating, better the filtration efficiencies. The MVRV ratings ranges from 1 to 16. EU is an equivalent rating methodology for filters in European Union. The next credit associated with source reduction strategy is low emitting materials. The intent or objective of the credit is to encourage the use of materials and systems with low VOC in order to reduce adverse health impacts on building occupants. First, let us understand the term VOC. VOC is an abbreviation of volatile organic compounds. VOC is not a single substance, it is a group of compounds. Common examples of VOC in building materials include benzene, ethylene, glycol, formaldehyde, etc. Volatile organic compounds, as the name implies, they are easily evaporable organic compounds. Most finishing materials like paints, coatings, sealants, adhesive, composite wood, carpets, etc. contains VOCs because they are processed wet and have to dry in room temperature. To earn points, the project should meet the compliance requirements specified in the table. The next credit under source reduction strategy is indoor air quality management during construction. The intent or objective is to reduce indoor air quality problems resulting from construction activities and promote comfort and well-being of construction workers and building occupants. To earn points in this credit, projects must develop and implement Indoor Air Quality Management Plan as per NBC of India Part 7 Construction Practice and Safety. Indoor Air Quality Management Plan incorporate following strategies as applicable. The first strategy is to control the source and path of contaminations by using low-emitting materials, isolating and ventilating contaminated areas to avoid cross-contamination. The second strategy is to implement and ensure best housekeeping practice in site. The third strategy is to protect MEP equipments from contaminants by covering the equipment during construction and also cleaning them before use. If the AC ducts are not properly sealed during construction, it may accumulate dust. The fourth strategy is to schedule activities carefully to reduce indoor air quality related issues. For example, activities like spray painting can be scheduled in the night hours. The last strategy is to protect absorptive materials like insulation, carpets, etc. from moisture damage. If these materials absorb moisture, it may result in mold growing and cause indoor air quality issues. The next mandatory credit is associated with ventilation. Mandatory requirement 1. Minimum fresh air ventilation. The intent or objective of this mandatory requirement is to provide adequate outdoor air ventilation to avoid pollutants affecting indoor air quality. To implement the compliance requirement, the project should meet minimum acceptable ventilation required for all regulatory occupied spaces. The requirement depends on type of ventilation: natural ventilation or mechanical ventilation. Mechanically ventilated spaces should meet requirement of ASHRAE standard 62.1 2010. We will come across the term regularly occupied spaces in many credits. Hence, it is better to understand what regularly occupied spaces in IGBC rating system. Regularly occupied spaces include workstation, meeting rooms, cafeteria, conference room, waiting area, etc. The following spaces are not considered to be regularly occupied spaces. Example, toilet, storeroom, etc. The next credit in indoor environmental quality is associated with credit 1 CO2 monitoring. The intent or objective of the credit is to continuously monitor and control carbon dioxide level in the building to ensure occupants' comfort and well-being. Higher concentration of carbon dioxide will cause ill health effects and discomfort to the occupants. Hence, it is necessary to monitor and control the level of CO2 inside the building. The requirement to earn credits is the project must install CO2 sensor in the written adducts and to maintain a differential CO2 level below 530 ppm in all regularly occupied areas. The next credit associated with monitoring and testing is Credit 7, Indoor Air Quality Testing after construction and before occupancy. The intent or objective of the credit is to avoid occupants' exposure to indoor airborne contaminants before occupancy in the premises so as to reduce the adverse health impacts on building occupants. The requirement to earn this credit is that indoor air quality testing has to be conducted in all regularly occupied areas and common areas. The test should be conducted after construction and before occupancy and also consistent with the ISO method. The contaminant concentration level should not exceed as given in the table. This table shows the maximum concentration level of contaminants as per ISO method. The air sampling test should be carried out in all the regularly occupied spaces. Let us first discuss how the air sampling test is conducted. The air samples from regularly occupied spaces will vary with respect to size of the building, number of ventilation system. For each portion of building served by separate ventilation system, the number of sampling points should not be less than 1 per 2500 square meter or for each contiguous floor area whichever is large, and also include areas with least ventilation and greatest presumed source strength. The air sampling shall be collected between 1 meter and 2 meter from the floor to represent breathing zone of occupants over a minimum 4-hour period. If the concentration at a sampling point exceeds the limit, the respective places have to conduct separate flush out with outside air and conduct the test again. This has to be repeated until all requirements have been met. When retesting non-compliant buildings area, take samples from the same location as in the first test. Air sample testing should be conducted after construction and before occupancy with ventilation system starting as at normal operational time with minimum outside air flow rate under this occupied mode with installing all the interior in the building. The next credit associated with visual comfort, that is indoor environmental credit 2, day lighting. The intent or objective of the credit is to ensure connectivity between the interior and exterior environment by providing adequate lighting. The points are awarded based on the percentage of area having illuminance level of 110 lux to 1100 lux. There are two approaches to comply this credit, simulation approach and measurement approach. First, let us discuss about simulation approach. In the computer simulation, show 75% of the regularly occupied spaces having illuminance level of 110 lux to 1100 lux on 21st September at 12 noon. In measurement approach, through daylighting illuminance, show 75% of the regularly occupied space have illuminance level of 110 lux to 1100 lux. The next credit associated with visual comfort is Indoor Environmental Quality Credit 3, Outdoor Views. The intent or objective of the credit is to ensure connectivity between the interior and exterior environment by providing adequate views. The requirement to earn credit is to provide views for 75% of all regularly occupied floor area to connect occupants with the outdoor environment. Direct line of sight to vision glazing should be between 0.9 meter to 2.1 meter above the finished floor level. Building occupant should have a clear view of sky or flora and fauna or both. Have unobstructed views for at least 8 meters from the exterior vision glazing. Areas with audio-visual facilities such as auditoriums, conference rooms, etc. can be excluded from this credit calculation with justification and supporting documents. The last credit we are going to discuss in indoor environmental quality is credit 6, occupant well-being. The intent or objective of the credit is to provide occupant well-being facilities so as to enhance physical, emotional and spiritual well-being of the building occupants. To earn credits, the project should provide well-being facilities to at least 5% of the building occupants throughout the day. Well-being facilities includes gym, aerobics, yoga, meditation or any indoor or outdoor games.